Welcome back, guys, to VoiceyHere and another r/MaliciousCompliance video. I'm your host, Captain Cameron, for the weekend show. I think that a lot of people fail to understand just how much their words matter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. In this first story, a hospital department doesn't quite understand the power of their words when they say, "We need as many as you can send us, stat." I work in the dispatch department of a hospital, and it's my job to receive phone calls from clerks and nurses requesting porters. I take the call, input the information, and send the info to a porter so they can proceed with the patient transfer, equipment delivery, etc. A certain department calls us incessantly asking for wheelchairs to be delivered. It doesn't matter how many wheelchairs they already have, they will always call us for more. They like to hoard them and hide them away in separate rooms, so that it looks like they don't have any when the porter arrives with more. In this hospital, hoarding any equipment creates delays for patient transfers because it becomes hard for porters to locate the needed equipment in areas where they're supposed to be available. This department has been getting away with this for years, and any complaint to management usually results in a temporary fix, about a week, in which we receive fewer requests for wheelchairs from said department. Anyways, on to my malicious compliance. It has been an extremely busy day, and the usual clerk from the hoarder department has been calling us excessively to deliver wheelchairs, and has been rude about it every time. We try to explain that we need to keep some wheelchairs on reserve for other departments, which we have explained thousands of times to them before, and she just scoffs at me and my coworkers, and repeats that she needs wheelchairs because she doesn't have any. At one point, the clerk calls me in a rage and is screeching in my ear about how we still haven't delivered any wheelchairs, which we have, and we have call records to prove it, and that she needs, and I quote, "as many as you can send us, stat," then slams the phone in my ear. Okay, I'll send you as many as we can. I proceed to call a porter that has worked here a long time and knows the situation with the hoarder department very well. Also, he is retiring soon, and has always been a guy that works around the rules. And we're all union, so we can get away with a lot. I tell him the situation, and tell him very clearly that they need as many as we can send them. He chuckles and says, "No problem." About 30 to 45 minutes later, I get a call from the hoarder department. It's not the rage lady from earlier, unfortunately, but it was still very satisfying to hear them say, "Can you please have a porter come remove some wheelchairs?" I say, "Sure, how many would you like removed?" She says, "I kid you not, as many as you can get out of our hallway. It's congested with wheelchairs and is a fire hazard." It's super satisfying to hear them want wheelchairs removed for once. But I figure they're exaggerating as usual, except this time the opposite of their usual request. By this point, the porter who delivered them has gone home. I call a different porter that I get along with, tell them the situation, and send them up to assess the chaos and remove some wheelchairs. She calls back when she's up there, and she's just laughing uncontrollably, while telling me there are over 30 wheelchairs stuffed in the hoarder department and the connecting hallway. Apparently, the clerks were trying to push the entire collection of them out of the hallway at once because they couldn't get through the sea of wheelchairs to move them one by one. The retiring porter literally trapped them in their department with wheelchairs. Surprisingly, no one got in trouble or talked to at all. I'm not even sure my coordinator heard about the situation. Hoarder department is still consistent with calling for wheelchair delivery, but a little less so. The rude clerk is still rude, but she is very prompt on the phone and a little less sassy than before. I call it a win. What I find a little bit worrying about this story is that this hoarder department was actively creating a logistic situation for the entire hospital. Their constant demand of wheelchairs and other things was legitimately upsetting the normal flow of the hospital for everyone else. The way that this person got revenge, though, is hilarious. It's almost too clever for me. I feel like it's something that you would see out of The Office or some other sitcom, so excellent job on that part. That is some great malicious compliance. A lot of times people ask for something without realizing what they're actually asking for. That happens in this next story, when an employee at a fast food company has to say, "Want me to come to work even though I'm sick? Fine." I've worked in fast food longer than I cared for. It was never glamorous, but the regulars were always nice and I got along with my coworkers. The general manager, on the other hand, was the worst. She constantly complained about wasting food product, had a huge chip on her shoulder because of a divorce, and would show off inappropriate pictures to employees who were with her in the office. She was never mean or spiteful, she just didn't work like a manager is supposed to. Around April, I got sick with the cold, and I had all the symptoms. Runny and stuffy nose, sore throat, nausea, and a bad cough. You name it, I had it. I tried calling out, but my general manager told me that I couldn't because the restaurant was understaffed. She didn't even give me time to explain that I was sick before saying, "You either come in or look for another job." She then hung up. She's done this before to other employees. They would take some medicine and come in anyway, but I wasn't having it. I knew what I had to do, and thus, I made my plan, the revenge. I didn't take any medicine to help with my cold. I made sure that if someone saw me, they'd immediately know I was sick. I came into work looking pale, ragged, and exhausted. I clocked in and went to work. I washed my hands so much that day because I didn't want the customers to get sick, but I had to prove a point. Every employee could see that I needed to go home, but the general manager said they'd be even more in trouble if I wasn't there. I tried to keep my head held high, but it's not easy when it feels so heavy. I constantly sneezed, coughed, blew my nose. It was pretty gross. Regulars complained that I needed to be home getting better, but the general manager ignored them. She actually thought it was better to have me there, working, possibly making everyone else sick, than to be at home getting better. What she didn't plan was for the district manager to make a surprise visit. When he saw me, he immediately pulled to the side and asked why I was there. I explained the situation to him and told him what the general manager told me. He was not happy. Before crap went off, he told me to clock out and go home, and wished me a speedy recovery. I wasn't there when he talked to the general manager, but other employees told me he tore her a new one, stating how it was dangerous to have me around food in my condition, and to threaten my job if I didn't show up was unethical and unprofessional, saying that if I didn't have a doctor's note after calling, that would be a better reason to say I would be fired than what she did. The outcome. The next 2 weeks, everyone was calling out sick. I had made all the other employees sick with my cold. The district manager called and told the general manager she had no one to blame but herself, since she made me come to work sick. Not only that, but she had to cook the food and help serve it. Some of the regulars even jabbed at her, saying it was her fault she was in this predicament. Not too long after, she got sick herself and had to use vacation time to recover. The best 2 work weeks of my life. No boss to watch me over my shoulder. Everyone was back, and no one else was sick, except the general manager. Having a sick person at all involved in food preparation is very dangerous, and the general manager, by not even asking why the worker would be late, really set herself up for some big trouble. I can only hope that the worker didn't get any customers sick, and that the general manager learned a very valuable lesson. In our next story, a few teachers get more than fed up when a fellow teacher doesn't follow the rule ID required. So this is about my father. He worked at a high school that required IDs for the students and the teachers alike. Pretty common thing for public schools, and equally common are the petty teachers that enforce that rule like it's the only thing keeping the school together. My dad doesn't care. He tells his class as much. If you're in class, you're fine. Don't worry about it with me. Other teachers in his department did not like my dad's attitude towards IDs. It wasn't taking class time, and he wasn't writing students up. So his class's behavior seemed better, and he was getting through the material the smallest bit faster. It's also not nepotistic for me to say he was one of maybe 3 good teachers in the department, and got the highest standardized test scores on average. The only people who took his class and failed his area on it, history, were kids who seemingly tanked the tests on purpose. So the petty teachers who didn't like him were out to get him. The next year rolls around and it's been announced that everyone needs to be enforcing the rules about the IDs harder. So my dad has to write people up for it. He hasn't been caring before, so he hardly notices when the kids don't have them. And his deal to the kids was if he forgot it, he wouldn't write them up. One day, he left it in his car and walked past the petty teachers, who noticed and didn't say anything to him. They went and narked to the principal, who had hired my dad and was his friend, instead of the assistant principal they were supposed to take it up with. She told him to make sure to wear his ID, and told them only to come to her if there was something that would distract from teaching. He said that would be fine, went home, and got to work. That was his 5th year at the school, and each year they issue a new ID. He had 2 that were on those extendable leads with the belt clip, and 3 on lanyards. He also scanned one and had it printed on an iron-on sheet. Then he ironed it onto one of those shirts from the 5-packs from Walmart, and the next day wore one of the blank shirts, his new iron-on over that, both of his clip-on IDs, and his 3 lanyards. Lo and behold, the teachers who narked on him were waiting by the door, and, as per his description, red-faced at what he did. He smiled and waved as he went past, and made a beeline for his room without running. He then took off his sport coat, the IDs, and ID shirt, and put the sports coat back on over the blank shirt. He stuffed 4 of the 5 IDs and the shirt into an empty drawer in his desk, and waited for students to start coming in. A few minutes later, the principal comes in with the main narc, and he's just sitting there, completely normal, one ID clipped to his belt, and he stands to shake the principal's hand. She says good morning, glares at the other teacher, and the narc walks away. When they're out of earshot, she just says, "Let me see the shirt." They have a laugh, and nobody bothered him about his ID again. For true just desserts, that teacher later got into a screaming match with my dad, where they did all the screaming. The cameras caught it all, including the 3 times my dad tried to walk away before being stopped, and the teacher was no longer working there by the end of the semester. I understand that enforcing rules is pretty important, but in a situation like this, where the dad was really doing well at teaching the class and it obviously wasn't being too disruptive, I don't understand why the petty teachers felt like they just had to get back at him. Maybe it was jealousy. This next story is simply titled Shoegate. I used to work for a shipping company, one of the big 2, in an office position. Our building had several different departments in it, but they were all non-customer facing. The office was in a nondescript office park. There was no sign except on the door itself. The building was locked and required a keypad entry. We only interacted with customers by phone and email. No Skype, no in-person. I worked there for 6 years and never saw a customer. The dress code was business casual, which, fine. I only wear skirts and dresses, so I look dressy anyway. In the summer, women could wear sandals, but nothing between the toes and nothing obviously beachy. Pretty reasonable. In summer 2012, I was just coming off disability and was informed that a new policy was that we couldn't have more than 3 toes showing in our sandals. Why? No one knows. So, I spend all weekend looking for sandals that I like that fit the recommendation. I hate peep-toed shoes, and they look awful on me, so that was out. I finally found a nice pair of wedge sandals that fit the bill and were $80. I arrived to work on Monday, and within the hour, I'm told that my shoes do not conform. I said, they only show 3 toes, that's the rule I was given. No. Turns out that the heel couldn't be higher than 3 inches, platform higher than 1 inch. No flats, also unprofessional, no rubber soles. And if you were wearing shoes that covered your foot, mules, then the back of your foot could be out. But if your feet were out, the back of your foot had to be covered. Exceptions for doctor's notes, begrudgingly. So I was taken into a room and my shoes were measured. I have super high arches, so a heel is comfortable for me. And I chose wedges because they are more stable. The platform of my shoe was 1 inch, and the heel was 3 inches. So I'm good, right? Well, the supervisor seemed frustrated. So then she says, "No wedges, they are not professional." I was like, what the heck? So she pulls up the dress code online and shows me the example shoes. There are 4 good example shoes: a stiletto closed toe, a peep toe high heel, a block heel high heel closed toe, and kitten heel mules. She states that because there are no wedges, then I can't wear wedges. I point out that I can't wear a regular heel and that there are no flat shoes shown. She tells me she'll discuss it with the group and have an answer for me tomorrow, and not to wear the shoes tomorrow. I'm like, screw this. I paid $80 for these shoes. I'm wearing them. So the next day I come in the shoes, and she tells me with a sour face that wedges are fine. However, she still doesn't think my shoe is appropriate, so tomorrow I have to wear other shoes but bring these shoes, so that all the supervisors could have a meeting about my shoe with my shoe present. I'm annoyed. This is ridiculous. This literally took up hours of my time over 2 days. Oh, but wait, I can escape the dress code shoes by having a doctor's note. I contact my orthopedist. I had had a knee surgery the year before, not related to most recent disability, and talk to the nurse. I explain the whole situation and describe my shoe, and ask if she or the doctor think this is an appropriate shoe after knee surgery. She said they definitely don't want me on heels and a wedge is fine. She also thought the whole situation was ludicrous, so she wrote me a note, doctor signed, exempting me from the dress code shoes and allowing me to wear whatever shoes I deem comfortable. I had her fax me the note. We had e-fax. I forwarded the facts to both of my supervisors, who were among the group of 7 supervisors who would meet tomorrow about my shoe. Within a few minutes, both were glaring at me, but I never heard another thing about my shoes again. I also wore the shoes every day that summer, and then with tights through the winter, because I am petty as heck. I wonder how much money the company could have made if they took all the effort that went into making sure people wore very specific shoes and instead put it into something that actually mattered. I mean, you hear stories like this and you just have to wonder, do they do these sorts of things because they're so bored at work? Like, do they not have enough stuff to do at work that they just make up rules and start petty fights for entertainment? You know, now that I think about it, that actually makes more sense than getting legitimately annoyed at someone for not having the kind of shoes you like. Our last story for today chronicles what happens when someone is forced to comply, but still not stupid. In the 1990s, although the Cold War had been winding down, Germany still enforced conscription. It's still on the books today, but not enforced anymore. Not everyone had to serve, as the army had been reduced in size, so only about 50% of the young men of any year had to go in the end. I was one of the unlucky young men going through medical checks, assorted testing procedures, and got a first taste of life in the military, namely procedures for procedure's sake, and lots of administrative headaches. So I decided to refuse service with the armed forces, a perfectly legal choice, extending my time to serve from 12 to 15 months, and earning the job title of Zivildienstleistender, somebody doing public service, or a Zivvy for short. So 18-year-old me ended up in a local hospital, doing general assistance, fetching patients for their treatments, etc. Until they told me I'd be transferred to the psychiatric ward to help there. They even included a reminder that under the conscription laws, I had no right to refuse that posting. Not that I had any intention of refusing, but I really looked forward to doing actual work with long-term patients. But this legal reminder got me thinking, if they were so eager for me to follow the rules, certainly they'd do the same. The rules stated explicitly that Zivvies were only allowed in assistance roles, were never to replace but only augment trained healthcare personnel, and had to receive mandatory training before dealing with certain types of tasks, e.g. patients with psychiatric disorders. The first day at the psychiatric ward came and went. Really nice ward. The nurses were really friendly and happy to have me, low on trained staff, so I was to replace a fully trained nurse. And they told me about the mandatory training, which I neither had nor found in my schedule in the near future. So I, following the rules, inquired at the local KWEA office, in charge of all the Zivvies in the region, about that training, and they didn't have me on the schedule either. By law, I was required to inquire whether tasking required additional training. The very next day, the head of nursing furiously called me into his office, asked whether I had been in contact with the guys at the KWEA because he had just received a fax referring to my call and ordering mandatory scheduled trainings for all 40 Zivvies at the hospital, between 2 and 4 weeks each, depending on their respective tasks. Apparently, they had always forgotten to notify KWEA of special training requirements, thereby increasing the amount of time they could use as cheap labor. The hourly rate was approximately 2 Deutsche Marks, or in US dollars, $1.20. The guy was livid. I had robbed him of nearly 120 combined weeks of slave labor just by following regulations he seemed to be so keen to point out. His last sentence was the famous one, "He who laughs last." So, after completing my 4 weeks of training, I returned to work in the psych ward, only to be reassigned nearly randomly. Thorax surgery, intensive care, neurology, a few weeks here, a few days there. He thought he'd punished me, but it was a great adventure, getting to know so many aspects of medicine. So he took the last tool he had available. He forced me to live on site. This last one actually was part of the laws intended for Army conscripts, not Zivvies. Nevertheless, it also applied to me. He ordered me to live on site, not to go home after work as every other Zivvy there was allowed to do. So I complied. Ah, sweet justice. Someone finally has to follow their own rules for once. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss another episode. Thanks for tuning in.